Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Hopeful Has Been podcast. And so, if you're just joining us, I'm going to ask you to go back and skip back to the previous episode before this one, where we started talking about the difference in back problems, back pain, and kissing spine in performance horses. So, in that podcast, we went through a ton of information on how to assess things that might be indicative of a back issue in your horse. And based on the length of that podcast, which we knew going into that this one was going to be a long one, that, I understand how frustrated horse owners can be. Because a lot of times we don't end up finding the root problem until it has already snowballed into something huge. And so that was why I wanted to spend a ton of time on the process of things that we look at as rehab therapists or as body workers, things we see in movement, things that we see in behavior, things that we feel in muscle tension. I wanted to start with those because I wanted you to have an understanding of how expansive the process is of trying to put the puzzle pieces in their slots so that we can look at the full picture of the equine athlete that's in front of us. And so now in this part 2, we are going to, tell ourselves, okay, we've got the horse that has checked off several of the boxes here of issues. So now, what the heck do we do about it, right? So I'm going to title the name of this episode From Diagnosis to Decisions, Making the Best Choices for Your Horse. Because there's no one-size-fits-all solution for this problem. Just in the same way that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for back pain in people either. And that's what makes it really frustrating as a therapist, to have to navigate social media where everybody's like, oh, you need to do this. Oh, you need to do surgery. Oh, you need to not do surgery. I would never do surgery. Like, you have all of these opinions just flying around. And as a horse owner, especially as a horse owner who's already stressed because your horse is exhibiting behavior problems or they're not performing the way that you need them to, you're already stressed out. And then you try to navigate social media and it's just insane, and I'm not picking on it because there's groups out there that are amazing for information. There are also groups out there that are not as good for information. Everybody's got an opinion, and I talk about it a lot. People on social media wielding their opinions like a weapon. They're not necessarily always looking to help you. They are looking to just blast you with what you're doing wrong and how they have figured everything out and the secrets of the universe and how they're doing everything so right. And, so I hope, if nothing else, that first episode helped with adding a little bit of logic and a little bit of maybe a different perspective of the way that we look at things, as people who our industry is to advocate for the horse. So, I'm going to kick off this episode with, coming back to a kind of statement that we started the last podcast with. The phrase "can't ride the radiographs," can't ride the rads. And so a lot of times we're gonna switch into talking a little more about kissing spine at this point. We're gonna say our problems have snowballed, and we know we need to go x-ray this horse because maybe we have some kissing spine there. Because most of your vets are going to start with x-rays of the back. If we come in and we are suspecting a back issue, even before they inject or anything like that, most times they are going to take x-rays. So, maybe we find those on a pre-purchase exam. Again, I deal with customers every day where they talk about, man, this horse has never had any problems, but here we found this on this x-ray. And to me, it's not a death sentence for that horse. It doesn't mean you need to be scheduled in surgery for that horse tomorrow or he needs to be retired on Thursday. What it does mean is that we need to make some lifestyle changes. The reoccurring theme throughout this episode is going to be, are you willing to make the lifestyle change your horse needs to have a better quality of life? So that phrase right there is going to encompass the horse that is just dealing with muscle tension and muscle issue, but it's also going to address the horse that is dealing with kissing spine, because you've got to be willing to make a lifestyle change, not a 30-day change, not a you stuck with something for 2 weeks and then went back to what worked change, not a you paid for surgery, didn't rehab your horse and went right back to running. I'm talking, are you willing to make a lifestyle change? So when we find this on, let's say, a pre-purchase exam, again, like they don't really do pre-purchases like they did back in the day where it's like, oh, this horse passed a pre-purchase, this horse failed a pre-purchase. We know that there's no perfect body out there, whether it be horse or human. So when we're looking at something with a pre-purchase, it's, we're comparing the factors of, does this horse fit us? Is this the horse as a rider we've picked? And it's like, okay, this horse checks all the boxes that I want in a performance horse. Now we have to see, is there anything lurking under that surface that maybe could be problematic? And then the second decision we have to make is, what are we able to live with and maintain? And what are some things that we go, yeah, no, that's a hard no for me. Because everybody, there's not a right and wrong answer. It's, what does your personal situation allow you to do? So here is an example. I would not purchase, this is me personally, this is my opinion. If I am a person who does not have time to commit to good riding and exercise of a horse, and maybe that horse is going to have to live in a stall or a paddock, there's no pasture to kick that horse out on. Maybe a great example would be how I'm out here currently in Arizona, where we have no pasture, we have paddocks for our horses. I would not personally invest in a horse that was going to be a back problem horse if I was somebody who only gets to ride or see my horse 1 or 2 days a week. Because these horses, when we get into the rehab part of it, are going to need more movement. They're going to need more exercise. They're going to need more maintenance. So if I was shopping for a horse, I would pick one that did not have pre-existing issues, that maybe could thrive a little bit more in the environment where I live. Now, if we have the person that, maybe discovers that their horse has kissing spine and they live out, or they can kick him out on 20 acres, he's got to go up and down terraces, and he's moving and navigating just like a horse would in the wild out there grazing, that horse honestly may do a little bit of self-correction there, as long as we have the feet balanced. So that may be a instance where we could take a little bit of a gamble on this horse of like, well, I know he's touching in a spot or two. I can maintain that. I'll kick him out on the pasture. He doesn't have to live in a stall. Lots of movement, lots of riding, correct feet angles. Okay, I still want this horse. He's in my price, he's in the budget, and this is the horse that I want. And then, of course, you have all different opinions there. So, to me, there's not a right or a wrong answer. When we are doing a pre-purchase, it's, what can you financially be able to maintain? What can you afford? And, are you going to get the enjoyment out of owning this horse? Because, some of us have horses that have a whole laundry list of health issues. Mine is one of them. Jordan has another phenomenal example of that. But the thing is, these are our heart horses. There's no amount of money that would make my horse exchange hands. So I kind of laugh and I use the phrase, I have a full heart and empty pockets, because she is one that has required more maintenance than horses that I have owned in the past. Now, uncovering the fact that, knowing now she has an OCD in her stifle that was missed all this time, I put a lot of pieces of my puzzle together, and I'm like, oh, now I can figure out how to maintain this. So, going back to, I know I mentioned this in the last podcast, but I'm going to mention it again. When we're talking about reasons that we take a horse to the vet, the reactive, hysterical, explosive, sometimes dangerous horse will usually find their way to the vet faster than the stoic, mechanical, just does the same thing every time, going through the motions stoic horse. Because a lot of times the warning signs get ignored on a horse that is stoic until they get to the point where they can no longer internalize what's going on, and then the stoic horse becomes the reactive horse. It's one of those, they were fine until they weren't fine, and when they weren't fine, they got everyone's attention. And so, let's talk about the process of deciding when to go to a vet. I'm going to talk a little bit about on my experience as a body worker. I have a rule. This rule came from my existing practice as a human body worker. I would tell people, if I cannot improve what we are working with, if I cannot improve the root complaint in 3 to 4 sessions, if I cannot make some improvement in 3 to 4 sessions, then we need more diagnostics. I need to refer you out. We got to go get MRI. We got to go try chiropractic. We got to go do something, because I'm just not getting what I need. I'm not getting the results that I need from my body work. And so I have carried, that rule has served me my entire career of working with people. And so I kind of adopted this similar thought process of working on horses, where, I tell everybody, if I can't, in 2 to 3 sessions, if I can't make a pretty big improvement on what we're working with, we need to go see the vet. That being said, I expedite the process a lot more with the horses. It is not uncommon for me to refer things out to a vet after 1 session. Sometimes I'm talking about things we need to check off with our vet 10 minutes into my assessment on a horse. The reason that I can make those judgment calls so much quicker when I'm working on horses is because with people, it takes longer to work through the layers, because there's such a strong emotional tie to what's going on in the body with us. Also, most of my clientele are also somebody that works a full-time job. So it's like, well, I would like to relax more and nourish my adrenals, but unfortunately, work comes on Monday morning and I have to get up and go do that. So sometimes the person's financial situation, or maybe they can't afford to come in that often. Their financial situation maybe makes it take a little bit longer to get to a solution. The biggest issue working on people is they don't want to make a lifestyle choice. They will come in and they will pay you to work on them. They want to be magically better, but they want to act like nothing they are doing in their day-to-day life has any effect on their current condition. And sometimes that is a hard battle to fight. I told a story in the last podcast where I talked about, if you want to get chewed out by me, a great way to do it is to come in being the chronic back pain client and continue to wear cheap flip-flops, because I'm going to chew you out for coming back in flip-flops after you've been told 2 and 3 and 4 times the flip-flops are keeping me from being able to help your back. Like, we've got to have arch support. We've got to have real shoes. So going back to our horses, again, a lot of times it is not uncommon in my experience level to, at the end of a session, go, all right, here's what I have found. Here's what we're going to work on in the meantime. I want you to get a vet appointment. Let's go get x-rays done. Let's do a full diagnostic. This is what I'm seeing. And, that also, I want to touch a little bit before we get too much farther in this episode on scope of practice. So sometimes sometimes the other therapists can be slightly put off by the amount of information that I am able to give in a session. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm not trying to come at this from a place of ego. Um, your experience level, in my opinion, should have some bearing on what you are allowed to say and do within a scope of practice. Is the therapist that has gotten certified in equine massage that's been working for 6 months, are they going to be able to detect these issues and know what your vet needs to look at in a single session? Probably not. Somebody who's done this for only almost 20 years, yeah, because I'm coming at you from a competitor standpoint, because I have done stifle surgeries on horses. I have done airway surgeries on horses. I have injected horses. I've had failed injections. I have some horses that, looking back with the skill set I have now, I totally could have picked out their problems, but I didn't have the skill set then. So one part of my assessment technique is my long list of years of experience. The other part of it is my education and my experience working in the therapy field. I promise you, when you have rehabbed 30 and 40 and 50 head of kissing spine horses, you can start to pick out the ones you are suspicious of. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, chances are it's probably a duck. And so where that gets crossways with people on social media is, you have these therapists that are so rigid with what is within our scope of practice, and they are looking all day, every day, for people like me to come and attack. It is never my intention to come between you and your veterinarian. It is never my intention to be misperceived as diagnosing or practicing veterinary medicine. I promise you, I make vets plenty of money because I love sending stuff out for x-rays. I send them left and right for x-rays. And so, that being said, as we're talking through this, I want you to keep that in mind, because I don't want it to look like I'm crossing my bounds of where we can practice. Although I feel like it's also a disservice to people like me who have spent a lifetime gaining education, knowledge, and experience, where they want to put us in a box of what we can say and can't say on the internet. But then every person who's not qualified can throw their opinion out into the wind, because that's all it is their opinion. When you start to add certifications, then that line gets blurred of, are you diagnosing or are you not? So, again, to circle back to our topic here, what I'm trying to say is, my experience takes me a long way, but you still have to have a great team of people in your corner. I may be able to spot a lot of things on the angles of the feet. I've worked with some amazing corrective farriers over the years, and that have valued my opinion, and I can take a situation to them and go, this is what my body work tells me. This is what I see in movement. Can you help me? And they have always been able to help me. I have worked with vets across the country. And, I value their skills. Like, none of us can do what we're doing if we did not have the backing of our vets. That being said, we're going to get into a couple controversial topics in this podcast, because when I talk about how I rehab these back horses, a lot of it is going to be very different than the protocols veterinarians are putting out. And, again, I can provide research, I can provide backing, I can tell stories of horses that we have helped. And this is where I feel like I am staying within my scope of practice. And sometimes our veterinarians are stepping out of their scope and into the domain that I have spent a lifetime studying. So, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, and then it's up to you to judge what's best for your horse. So, I have a technique that I use. I also teach it in my bodywork course, of assessing the dorsal fascia and how stuck or how adhered it is to the spinous processes over the top of the spine. And so, basically there's no way for me to teach that over a podcast or over a video. So I'm not going to, but I'm going to talk about a little bit about this technique. So a lot of times when I'm working on people, the stagnation, I will find more of the stagnation just below the area of the back that has joint issue, that, whether it be a herniated area there, whether it be some stenosis, insert problem here. And so I started seeing if I could cross that over on the horses. And so I have a little technique that I use where we strum across that dorsal line, and I teach people how to feel for areas that are adhered down. And in a high percentage of horses, when we have went and x-rayed, again, now I have several things that I check off my list. Hoof angles are one. But when I go and use this little technique going across the top, a lot of times we will end up finding the area that touched right behind that area that's adhered down. And so that's something that I started routinely checking. And I'm like, okay, we're on to something here. When you're spotting this on 20 and 30 head of horses and a high percentage of them can be backed up with x-rays, I'm like, okay, this is one of my boxes. Like when we're talking about what we do as therapists, we are testing variables. I tell everybody it's like a junior high science fair experiment. I can only test one variable at a time, and my assessment is a huge part of that. In my experience, I have not encountered maybe a tiny percentage of horses, but I have not encountered very many. I would say 95% of the kissing spine horses that came through our rehab or that I have encountered in my mobile practice also had negative plantar angles in the hind feet. So this goes back to what I talked about in the first podcast, where when we have that lowered heel, then our dorsal line of fascia, starts to have to change and starts to have to draw everything together because the body's always trying to create balance, right? And so, as that heel is being lowered, that also tightens our ventral line of fascia. And so then as our ventral line gets tight, then we have more restriction through the stifle. We have more restriction coming down the leg. We are also putting compression on our sciatic nerve, our femoral nerve bundle, all of our nerves that come through the hindquarters to help motion of the leg and to help with, just general proprioception and things like that. And so, that when I'm doing my bodywork sessions, I start at the feet. That's kind of where we start visually, and then we start working our way up. And so, in my opinion, it is never a bad idea to x-ray. Like I'm a huge advocate of x-raying feet once a year. When you do your Coggins, shoot you 4 laterals of the feet. I promise it will save you so much money. If it's a horse that has been problematic, I would shoot x-rays every 6 months. If it is a horse that we are working on an active issue with, say, for instance, a horse that we have put wedge pads on or we are making a drastic change, those are horses that I would re-x-ray every 90 days. I've had some horses that we have re-x-rayed them every set of shoes for about 3 sets. It just depends what we're working on. But, in that time frame, you could also shoot a set of x-rays of the back. Now, if your joint spacing is wide open, if your laterals of your feet look perfect and everything's great, maybe we don't need to repeat that yearly. But, part of where we can really help our horses is through prevention. If we don't prevent some of these problems, it's a whole lot easier to prevent something than it is to have to go back and fix something, right? My goodness, we'd rather check the air in our tires before we drive on a flat tire for 20 miles and run it completely off the rim. That usually yields in a pretty expensive correction when we drove long enough that we have run a flat tire right off of the rim. So x-rays are going to be the most common form of diagnostic. And again, I have no problem sending a horse to a vet. Also, in my experience as a body worker, I have only encountered a few vets that are like, oh, what does she know? What does she know about what she's doing? Like, well, why do we need to x-ray this? Well, for one, because that's how you make a living. Like when we're working with difficult vets, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this a little bit later on the podcast. I've had some where it's just like when an owner comes in and wants something x-rayed, at the core root, they are advocating for their horse. And I have never understood why a vet clinic will say, well, I don't know why you want to x-ray that. Well, why does it matter if I'm paying my bill? But anyway, so back to other things that I see in my sessions, and I talked about this, but I'm going to circle back to it again. Muscle tension that doesn't resolve in 2 to 3 sessions. If I give an owner movement therapy and corrective exercises to do to improve range of motion and to start to strengthen the stabilizing muscle, and that horse is not improving, and they're doing the stretches, they're doing the things, the homework things that I have given them, and that horse is staying the same, we need a better diagnostic. It's time to go to the vet. This is not something that I'm going to be able to resolve with just body work and the tools in my toolbox. I disagree, in my opinion, with therapists that want to spend a year or years maintaining something. If you are paying me and I cannot progress the situation, then I got to have some help from the village of people that are here advocating for this equine athlete. One exception to that on the human side might be the older client that comes in that I'm never the therapist that goes, oh, I want to work on you every week. Now, I did have some older clients that were retired, and financially, they said, I want to come in and keep a weekly standing appointment, or I have this problem, I'm aware of it, I'm not going to surgery, I know all I can do is maintain it. I'm going to come in every week. Okay, if you can afford it, let's go for it. Like I will keep maintaining it. But with our horses, our money goes in so many different directions. And most of my clients are clients that have to work on a budget. I totally understand that. Like I don't have just expendable money to throw out into the wind. So I'm searching for results when I'm using something. And so, that's the same thing, whether we're using equipment, whether we're doing body work, we've got to get to the root of the situation so we can figure out how to remedy that. And now maybe in the same sense where we have the older person, maybe we also have the older horse that it's like, well, he's 18, most definitely not a candidate for surgery. All right, let's work together to continue to maintain this to give him the best quality of life that we can. But I don't want to be the person, if I am working on the same problem a year from now that I started with, I am doing a disservice, in my opinion, to that customer, because why are we not progressing? I want my clients to progress. And so, when we talk about things that we can do, so let's say hypothetically, we have went to our vet, and let's say we have the horse that maybe is slightly NPA behind, maybe not even enough, maybe 1 degree NPA behind. Okay, maybe that's not enough that I want to go crazy and put wedge pads on and make some big drastic change. That might be an instance where we go, okay, the spine is not touching yet. The muscles are tight. We want to head this off now. Now we are in an ideal situation to head this off and to create a life change that will improve this horse and prevent our problems into snowballing into something that is going to be really painful or cause poor performance. Those are the type of horses that respond extremely well to corrective exercise or movement therapy. There is a book by the author Jacques Ballou that is 55 corrective exercises for horses. She also has a brand new one on fitness and conditioning that I have not read yet, but I'm sure it's great because all of her books are great. But I recommend the 55 corrective exercises one a lot because it has a lot of different patterns in it and it's easy for the average horse owner to understand. So you can look up in there what the purpose of an exercise is. Like, maybe I have an SI that's unlevel. Okay, I can look through there and go, oh, this exercise creates symmetry in the hind end. All right, there's an exercise that would help this horse. We also use a lot of raised poles and cavalettes. And I have made countless videos on my corrective exercises that you can find on the Superior Therapy page. So I'm not going to hang out on this topic for a ton of time because you can go back and watch those explanation videos. But the reason that I like to use raised poles over ground poles is because when we are correcting imbalances in posture, and when I need to take the pressure off of the hamstrings and the back, I need that horse to be accountable and picking their feet up higher. Your visuals would be like a person working on a Stairmaster or a football player running through the tires. So I like to set up my cavalettes in a straight line. I do 3 in a row, about 3.5 to 4 foot apart. 4 foot is usually about your average horse. If it's going to be a horse that's shorter strided, like a little cutting horse or something like that, they're going to be about 3.5 foot. Jet, I believe, sets hers about 4.5 feet apart, but I think she works a little more with warm bloods and English horses than what my demographic of my clients are. So my easy rule of thumb, because I don't like stepping stuff off and measuring it, is when I set my 3 in a row poles, I want my horse to be able to take 1 step with each foot in between. So if they step over one and then step over the next one, they're too close together. If they take an extra step or 2 or 3 in between my cavalettes, they are too far apart. You will find I am real simple with my thought process on rehabbing things. I try not to overcomplicate it. What those 3 poles in a row do, again, like a person working on a stair stepper, we are able to isolate individual diagonals. And what we are looking for is, if our horse is going in a circle to the right, we want them to load that left hind. That left hind, they need to be driving off a bit, which allows the inside front, which is our right front, to swing forward in that circle, which creates our lead whenever we go up to a lope. We also start all of our corrective exercises at a walk. Why is a walk important? A walk tells us where we have muscle weakness because that allows us to assess the stabilizing muscle, and it does not allow the horse to use adrenaline to get through the exercise. Where if we were trotting and loping and that exercise was hard for that horse, they're just going to use a little bit of adrenaline to get through it. So it's kind of like if I was carrying a big heavy box. If I was afraid I was going to drop this box before I got to my destination, I'd be scuttling along really, really fast, right? And probably hold my breath trying to tense everything to carry this big heavy box. If I have adequate enough fitness, like, okay, I pick up the box, it's not that heavy. I might even stop and talk to Pat on the way to my destination with this box because I have enough stabilizing muscle that I don't have to use adrenaline and I don't have to rush through what I'm doing because my body is strong enough to complete the task. And so that is what we see a lot of issue with in our performance horses. Everybody is so concerned about cardio and long trotting and loping and running and all this. And it's like, you cannot run before you walk. You have to strengthen the body a little bit at a time. Otherwise, your compensation patterns are going to make all the hard work you're putting in not yield the results that you want it to. And so, that brings us into our warm up. So my grandpa was an amazing horseman, very obviously in that generation, not a therapist, no education there because it wasn't available. But he had a rule. So our arena that I grew up with, sat down at the bottom of a hill. Like, so we had like 5 big terraces you had to come down to get to the arena, and then we had a flat bottom down there that we could lope on. That was a big square pasture that made about a mile when you're loping straight. And then, of course, we had a roping arena there. My grandpa had a rule because he retrained a lot of problem horses, gave a lot of roping lessons, stuff like that, that it needs to take you 20 minutes to get down to the arena and 20 minutes to get back to the house from the arena. Now, in my mind, I think his thought process on it was he didn't want somebody to get bucked off of a cold-backed horse by just hightailing it down to the arena and just kicking them straight out into a lope, because we all know how well that goes on a cold day. But when I now looking at it as a therapist, how long does it take for us to have a nice walking warm-up? How long does it take to thin the synovial fluid in the joints so that the body is limber enough to do the task that we are asking? About 15 to 20 minutes. His thought process, in my opinion, what I think his thought process was on taking so long to get back to the house, your 20-minute ride back to the house, we would, snake those horses up and down, do serpentines on the terraces. We would circle trees. We just rode the whole pasture instead of just going straight up to the house. In my opinion, I think his idea was you don't want a horse, especially that could possibly be a kid's horse, to be a horse that hurries up to the house. Like, you don't want them to get done with work and want to snatch that bit and run to the house. But from a therapy standpoint, how long does it take the lactic acid to cycle out of the muscles and back into the body after strenuous exercise? 20 minutes. So there was common horsemanship skills that yielded huge results because we did not have horses that had soft tissue injuries. We didn't have horses that had back pain. Like, our horses stayed fairly sound for a long time. And to be honest, the first real soft tissue injury that I dealt with on one of my personal horses was not until I had hit adulthood and was working full time and trying to ride multiple horses at the same time. So we're going to get into time management too in this podcast later on. I realized when I started working full time, we cut corners. We cut corners, and those cut corners end up snowballing into giant problems later on, or injuries. So when we're talking about the corrective exercises, and again, I'm not going to get into a ton of stuff on it because I have so many videos on that topic. 15 to 20 minutes of those, like, I look at those corrective exercises like yoga. There are warm up to our ride. They're not designed to replace riding. Now, if we have a horse in the rehab that we're obviously not riding because it's a client horse, we pair those corrective exercises with working on the underwater treadmill, and it creates a balanced routine. And it also gives our owners something to continue on with once they get the horse home, so they can maintain those changes in posture. So you can use them as a gentle warm up to your exercise, or you could use them as a cool down. So we finished our ride. All right, let's do 15 or 20, let's do 10 or 15 minutes of corrective exercise as a part of our 20 minutes of cool down. And you can do them walking or riding. I always start my clients out on the ground because I want you to start to detect the patterns and problems in motion that your horse is having. So, we also talked a little bit about, a contracted abdomen versus the horse that maybe is a little bit overweight. We have to start getting the core into better function. We have to start loosening the hips up. We have to start getting that nice gentle swing of the back. We've got to start loosening up that thoracic sling area. The last thing I can correct on the posture of the horse is the neck and head. Why? Because the neck and head acts as a counterbalance for weakness elsewhere in the body. So if I am looking at a horse in my perfect circle drill, or I'm looking at a horse over my cavalettis and they're tipping their head to the outside, I have to, within good conscience, ignore that and have a little bit of grace until I start to strengthen the hind end. Once I can start to get that hind end strengthened, this comes back to our suspension bridge visual that we talked about in the first podcast. If one side of our suspension bridge is sinking, what happens? Well, the top of it starts to fold together and get weak. So as I'm starting to strengthen the end pillar here of my suspension bridge, then I can start to stretch everything back out. So this is where corrective exercise is extremely helpful for creating better motion, fluid motion of the back, but also starting to create more joint space there. And so, to go back to what I talked about on the hoof angles, again, if I have a horse that is just a little bit off, I may tell that owner, okay, let's do 30 days of corrective exercise and the stretches that I'm going to give you. We're going to work with some body work techniques, and let's circle back of where we are in 14 days or in 30 days. And then we see, are we making progress? Because if it's not a horse that's 3 or 4 degrees negative behind, I might try the exercise approach first, because if I can create better fitness, if I can create better posture, maybe we don't have to do something so crazy drastic like putting on wedge pads or doing a whole bunch of injections. Now, I might still send that person, if they have not x-rayed the feet, I might still totally send them for x-rays, because let's have a baseline to start with. Because if we don't have a comparison, we don't really know how much progress we've made. The quality of life of our horse and the willingness of our horse will tell us a lot, but it doesn't paint the true story. So if I have a horse that has minimal issues, most of the time we can correct that with just changes in environment, changes in movement. Maybe I have the owner that they don't know any better, and so their exercise routine is, I grab him out of the stall and I go down there and loop circles for 15 minutes and I put him back in the stall. Well, okay, we can solve a lot of compensation patterns by mimicking the horse in nature. This is a horse that has to be turned out. Most horses are a horse that has to be turned out. Like, we cannot leave them in a box stall and then simply go lope circles and then return them to that box stall. That will create a whole issue of problems. Whole laundry list of them. Our horses in nature are designed to be foraging 16 hours out of the day. And they've documented horses in the wild traveling, anywhere from 20 to 30 miles in a day, looking for food, looking for water. They are designed to be an animal that stays in movement. When we have them in a stall, it is diminishing their digestion. It is diminishing their organ function, because they are designed to move. We are designed to move as well. There's a whole reason that school systems are designed where you have a meal and then you go have recess. Part of it is you've got to do something with the energy, as the nutrients are going into our body, that helps to energize the body, right? Well, so when we need kids to sit down and focus, we need to do something to discharge that energy that they're getting from the nutrients of the food, but also that bit of stimulation helps the digestion. Interestingly enough, it's also been proven in humans that if you eat standing, that reduces your digestive ability as well. We are designed to sit stationary and consume our food. Now, that being said, I fall in the category of I am real bad about walking around with a sandwich and working through the barn. So many of us entrepreneurs are really bad about the walking and eating at the same time. But, sometimes life, we have to do what we have to do, right? But with our horses, we want to advocate for their needs. So, this is where pastures are great, track systems, turning them out for socialization in a group setting with their friends. You have to figure out how do you get the amount of movement that the average horse needs in a day. Because nobody's going out there and riding. Some people are riding for 10 hours at a time. The average performance person is not. Those are our trail riders, our endurance people. They're logging a lot of time on their horses. I love to go out and trail ride. That is part of the reason that we like to spend our off time out near Sedona, Arizona, because I love going and riding there. But the average person with competition goals isn't looking to go ride that many hours a day on their horse. The average working person also doesn't have that many hours. So we have to figure out what can we do with our horses that creates and stimulates more movement. And so, one of the easiest things that people gravitate to is the use of walkers, whether it be a free flow walker or whether it be an old school hot walker. This is one of those topics I get a little bit on a soapbox about because I have seen it be so detrimental to the health of a horse. I always tell everybody, I'm like, it's literally called a walker. It's not called a runner. It's not called a long trotter. It's not called a lope circles on this thing merry-go-round. It is literally called a hot walker or a free flow walker. Hot walkers have been around forever and ever, kind of since the dawn of time of horse racing. We have progressed to having free flow walkers. My preference is always going to be a free flow walker because I like a horse to be able to get their head down and stretch if they want to. Where our hot walkers, you have to have their head tied at least high enough that they're not going to get silly and stick a leg through the lead coming off of the walker, because then you have a whole wreck happening. But when we talk about the history of this piece of equipment, it was designed to help with the warm up and the cool down of racehorses. So the old original hot walkers, and you can still find them at all the racetracks, turned so slowly that you could walk up and unclip a horse, put a lead rope on and lead them away, or bring a horse from the track, walk up without turning the walker off, clip that horse onto there and walk away. So basically the design of this piece of equipment was to help with the warm up and the cool down. So where things progressed when we started having the free flow walkers come on the scene is they started putting these motors in them that could literally go at breakneck speed. And the manufacturers don't tell people why it's unethical to have a horse going that fast on that piece of equipment. And part of it is because you have no brake in there. It is going at the same intensity. And so if you don't pay attention and that horse starts to get fatigued, then they're going to start developing a compensation pattern to survive that exercise. Because more times than not, people want to add electricity to their gaits instead of paying attention to why the horse does not want to walk on that walker. It's, let's just electrify the gaits and make them walk. Let's just make them do the thing. And I promise you, when you deal with a lot of back horses with back issues, you will find forward motion is hard for these horses. And so they are the horse that when they figure out they can stop the walker, they're going to be the first one on there to stop it. Or they're going to get emotionally flooded and reactive, and they're going to be the horse that's running under the gates, just trying to escape the exercise. So now I'm not going to say that a free flow walker is a bad piece of equipment. We had one in our rehab. Obviously, when Jordan bought out my practice, she now has the walker that I had there at Guthrie. When we are, but if you watch a horse go around a walker, how do they move? Flat-sided, and they usually look to the outside. And if their head is up, if they're one that cheats up on the gate and they're going too fast, they're going to be inverted. And that's doing the opposite of what we want it to do. So just in the same way that most error that you see involving underwater treadmills is having the horse going too fast, most error that you see using hot walkers or free flow walkers is having the horse going too fast. One way that we found that was extremely advantageous for putting horses on the walker if we were trying to break compensation patterns is we would use the Pro 6 balance system because then it was helping to retrain those correct diagonals as the horse was on the walker. So if I put them on there and they wanted to look to the outside, they're getting the Pro 6 on there. If they're a horse that travels pretty straight and balanced and they're looking down and moving okay, maybe I don't necessarily need that on that horse. I also disagree with bidding a horse up in there because that's what everybody's saying. The horse looks to the outside. So the obvious thing is, all right, let's put side reins on and crank his head over. What ends up happening is because that horse is using the head to balance with, they will let the side rein continue to pull on them, but they will tip their pole to the outside. So you still end up with this twist in the neck. And as we talked about in the last podcast, if our neck is locked up and restricted, our back will also be locked up and restricted. So we are negating the entire goal of using that equipment. We had a client that we actually had to fire as a client that had multiple horses, and she never had time to ride, always had time to be at the shows, always, just kind of that client that had a lot of excuses for the issues she was having in her horses. She had 5 head of kissing spine horses, not a one of them bred similar. And so, the only common denominator was her. Where we started having problems with the kissing spine was after the purchase of a free flow walker. And, her idea of exercise was throwing these horses on the walker and just point blank terrorizing them on it at a high rate of speed. All these horses are traveling inverted. And then here we are with this entire herd of kissing spine horses. And, not wanting to do surgery on them, and her thing is, well, I work and I have a bunch of kids and I have all of these things. And I said, and then at one point I was like, okay, but at what point do you say I have too many horses to exercise to be able to still go to my show on the weekend? At what point do you stand up and say the righteous thing for the horse is to not compete until I have them fit? Now, in her defense, the manufacturer of that walker sold it to her with the expectation of this will take the place of your riding. If you don't have time to ride, just put them on the walker and they're going to be fine. They are not fine. That is not the way fitness works. And furthermore, the size of your circle you're not going to be able to only condition on a 60-foot circle and then come down and have a horse that's expected to make a sharp turn in a barrel pattern. That is just not how biomechanics works. So we end up, and this client was a great paying client, a frequent flyer to the barn, but we would come in and these horses would be so awful to deal with, all of them. Again, you have 5 head of horses that are having all of these same symptoms, and they're ulcered out, they're angry, they're kicking at you, they're biting at you, they're hard to groom, they're hard to start on the tread. because when you get back pain involved, when you have back and stifle pain involved, sometimes those are the horses that want to pop up on the tread. They don't want that because they are so restricted. They don't want to move forward. And so they're the ones that can get rowdy on the tread and want to run through your hands, want to bolt off of the tread, want to leap off of the tread instead of just stepping off of it. There's just all kinds of things that you have to work around. And so, we worked with this client for a while trying to correct these issues. And, great paying client, no problem getting the bills paid, but unwilling to make the life choice that it took to benefit these horses. And, at one point, I know, like, she talked to me about doing surgery, at least on a few of them, at least on her favorite few. And my thing to her was, if you cannot change your conditioning plan, I wouldn't do surgery on them. Would not do surgery on them, because your problem is your conditioning and lack of conditioning. And so, it ended up being one of those things where it created resentment with my staff, where they would just dread every time she called. They would dread each month we had multiple of those horses in our barn, and it created unrest in my staff. And so I finally had to pull her aside and say, look, this is not personal, but it's our job to advocate for the horse. And it is creating unrest in my staff because they work really, really hard, and you are unwilling to make the lifestyle changes that you need for this whole group of horses. Again, it's not like it's one, it's a group. And so, it got down to this is not working. Like, this is not working, and it's not working for the goals of our facility. Therefore, we've got to have a parting of ways. And there's differences in how people run their facility, because there are tons of facilities that would just say, yeah, I'll take your horses. I don't care. I'm getting paid either way. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm getting paid. We just intend to run our practice that way. And so, when we come back to that, circling back to that fitness, we have to have a base foundation of fitness. And we can't take a shortcut, using a walker. Are you using it for the correct reasons? It's a great piece of equipment to get horses out of stalls at a nice leisurely walk. We actually would put raised poles in ours. And actually my walker set on a bit of an incline. So I had 4 different types of terrain in my walker. I had an incline that came up, and then I had a little bit of a dirt hump in there. I had sand on the back, on just the back side, on like maybe 1/4 of it. And then on the opposite sides, we had one set of raised poles that you had to go over. And so that kept those horses looking down at the different terrain. And I would even kind of let the Bermuda, like the grass, grow up a little bit, where if they wanted to reach down and snatch a little bit of grass as they're on there, that's fine. Stretch the head, neck, forage a little bit, and keeping it at a speed where some of them would get back towards the gate and then maybe have to trot up, or they could just keep at a solid pace. Now, again, I'm not saying that this is not a great piece of equipment if you're using it correctly. Sometimes I would remove my raised poles out of there, and I might trot a horse in there or lope a horse in there, but I was doing it in intervals. So that meant you were not allowed to leave the control panel. If we clicked to that horse and we want him to kind of surge forward and maybe kick up into a lope, I'm going to let him lope 1, 2, maybe 3 circles. I'm going to back that horse back down, let him walk a few circles, catch his breath, surge him back forward, let him lope out and move. Sometimes we ended up using that as our transition from, the tread back out to the round pen or something like that on my horses that were in good foundation of fitness that needed just a little bit extra. But I'm never going to turn one on there at a trot, and most certainly not at a lope, and walk away. Also, when I was doing that interval training, I typically, unless I had two horses that were at the same fitness level, I only did that with one horse at a time on there, because I want to focus on that horse, because the first sign of fatigue or weakness, I need to back that horse back down. I dread seeing videos on social media where horses are trapped on there at a high intensity speed, and you see the one that is obviously flailing, trying to keep up, and nobody's paying attention to that horse. Workouts are designed to be individualized. And so, again, now we're going to progress on to talking about the horse that maybe is touching in a spot or two. Usually that horse is going to be accompanied by negative angles back behind. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Many times you will find stifle issues before you find the back issue. So chances are we may have already injected stifles a few times on this horse. So we go to our vet. All right. So, diagnostically, we x-ray and it's like, okay, we have a spot or two that's close. Maybe we have feet that are 2 or 3 degrees negative at the end of a farrier cycle. Now we have to decide, what can we do to improve this horse, and what can we do to start to create better joint space in that spine. Now I'm not going to revisit the broken record of corrective exercises. Corrective exercises and what I just spoke on the walkers, that's going to translate through every degree of severity that we talk about here. So I'm not going to revisit the same topic with each horse. So in that instance, we have to determine how much pain is that horse having. Is this a horse that maybe our vet decides to do some injections on? In my experience, injections are fairly short-lived. They give you a good baseline, because when we talk about what are we doing with injections, we are decreasing inflammation and decreasing pain. So basically we are zeroing out to a baseline, and then we got to figure out how the heck did we get in this situation of why is our horse so sore. So if a horse is 3 degrees negative, I am probably going to talk to a farrier about coming in and helping with that. Now, some of the farrier pages that I follow, they even talk about the horse that balances out to 0. So a horse that when the farrier comes and resets them, they're balanced. But then as they grow out, that heel starts to fall. And so by the end of a shoeing cycle, that horse may be 3 degrees negative behind, which changes the amount of tension in the back drastically. 3 degrees doesn't seem like much. When you're talking about this much of a change, it doesn't seem like much. But if you're somebody that is only used to wearing tennis shoes, I encourage you to go put on a small heeled shoe and walk around with it and see how much your hamstrings hurt, see how much your back hurts, see how much your calves shorten in a very short amount of time. And then to go back to this horse that balances out and then slides negative. Okay, so you've worn these high heels for a while. Now go back to your tennis shoes. Well, now everything has to stretch back out, and that causes discomfort as well. And so, the lower the angle of the heel, the more pressure we are going to have on the sciatic nerve. Same is true in people. And so, that's where I circle back to footwear. Doesn't matter if I'm talking about a person or a horse, that's where I'm going to start. And so, in my experience, injections are pretty short-lived. So but it does give me some time to go, okay, if I break this pain cycle and I fix the feet, can I condition this horse out of this and create more space in the back? Circling back to the Pro 6, I touched on it just a little bit. One of the things that I like about the Pro 6 system is that it does not attach to the face or the mouth. So it is a resistance band balance system. We actually have a free educational course on it on our education site. You can look up Pro6 on Facebook. They have a great group as well with lots of information. But I am not a fan of the Pessoa system. I am not a fan of the Equine system. I do not like anything that hooks into the mouth, and I do not like things that just drag the hip up underneath them. The Pro6 system actually works on the diagonals, where as one hind leg moves up, it frees up the diagonal front. So it keeps that horse moving correctly. So it makes it very hard to stiffen, not hard, it discourages the horse from stiffening that rib cage and trying to lead with the incorrect diagonal. We've had a lot of great success with it, as far as, improving proprioception, improving condition and fitness, but breaking down compensation patterns. That's my big one that I use that for. Horses that do not travel in the tread correctly, horses that do not travel in my corrective exercises correctly. We've also used that for horses that are hard to shoe. And we're going to circle into that with back horses in just a minute. So if I have a horse that is only touching in a spot or two and the vet calls it mild to moderate, my first plan of action would be, what can I achieve with fitness and corrective exercise, rather than just jump straight to surgery. If we need to inject to break the pain cycle, okay, that's fine. We need to understand that that's not a fix. That is giving us a clean slate. If I have a horse that is touching in multiple spots, now we have to pro and con. How do we feel about surgery? Because here, nobody can make that decision for you. Your vet can give you suggestions. Your therapist can give you suggestions. The internet can give you suggestions. But ultimately, that choice is up to you, because I do not feel like I have the right to tell a client, you have to do something. When I make the personal decision for surgery is when I cannot resolve pain. If I cannot get pain under control, I will never be able to correct the posture of the horse. I cannot train a horse through pain, because the body is designed for the compensation patterns. We look at compensation patterns like they're a negative thing, which they are, but it's the body's way of protecting itself. So, in a sense, we should really honor the body and say, okay, thank you for protecting our weak areas, because otherwise we would be unsafe. Thank you for altering my gait, so that I could get through my day at work. Thank you for taking care of my horse so he can stand up in the trailer. But when we transition into actual pain, now we have to have some sort of an intervention. When I'm talking about surgery with people, I have some people that are so anti-surgery, and there's a fear aspect there, because there's the fear of, what if this doesn't fix it? But then there's also the fear of, what if something goes wrong? There's always risks in any procedure that we do. And so when I make the decision for surgery is when my base level of fitness has failed. So in a perfect scenario of a horse coming into my rehab, I would rather have 30 days of using my equipment, using my therapies to condition that horse and have them as fit as possible within their tolerance of pain, before I send that horse to surgery. And where that thought process comes from is the human side. They will not, trauma being your exception, car wreck, horse wreck, where we have a fracture, we have, something that is in dire need of surgery. If this is an elective back surgery, they require you to be under a certain BMI before they will do the surgical procedure. Not because we're fat shaming anybody, not because we're shaming anybody's body, because they want you to have the best possible scenario to heal and recover. I had a client that needed to have a back procedure done, and where his BMI was at, he had to lose 75 pounds before they would consider doing the surgery. And he ended up losing over 100 pounds by the time it was all said and done. That actually improved his back pain tremendously. He still opted for the surgical procedure, but then continued to lose weight. And he ended up like losing like 150 pounds. It was amazing. And has kept it off for years. And this is where it comes back into that lifestyle change. When we see surgeries fail, most times it is not a botched procedure. Most times it's people did not keep up with that lifestyle change. They did not continue their physical therapy exercises. They did not continue their stretches. They did not continue their mobility. And then what ends up happening is you have issue with the vertebrae above or below the ones you fixed. And it's that chain reaction thing that will come back and haunt you. And so when I have people that ask me about doing surgeries on their horse, that is the first thing I'm going to ask them is, are you willing to make a lifestyle change? Because if not, our suspension bridge has the probability of coming right back together if we don't correct the angles of the hind feet and if we don't correct the base level of fitness. If I had a horse that had kissing spine surgery, that is not a horse that I would kick out to pasture for 5 or 6 or 7 months or a year, and then expect that horse to come back and perform at the level they were performing at when I turned them out. We have to have some base fitness there. And when we talk about that lifestyle change, another thing, I would not, in my opinion, turn out, especially if it was a horse that had a probability to be slightly heavy. If it was a horse that was an easy keeper that was touching in the back, that would not be a horse that I would put out on a round bill. I would not just kick them out and let them gain a ton of weight. There's part of the thing that, because it's just going to pull down on that spine, and it's going to be harder to get that horse back into condition. So again, this comes down to, are you willing to make the lifestyle change your horse needs to rehab the problem? Whether we choose surgery or we don't, how committed are you to the well-being of your horse for their entire existence or as long as you own them? I see people every day on the internet that are furious. I have a botched kissing spine surgery. The horse is touching again. And when you get to talking to them, their fitness is not there. Their fitness is not there. They are doing minimal effort to maintain the condition of that horse. Now, I think part of the problem is we do not preach on how important it is. The average therapist, the average vet does not preach on enough on how important it is. We want the easy fix. We want injections. We want to throw equipment on there. We want to do an acupuncture session. We want to have the chiropractor out. We want to do all of these things. But what we don't stay committed to as riders is the general fitness that fits the design of the animal, how nature intended. This is why you don't see a lot of kissing spine and things like that in horses that go trail riding a lot, because different terrains going up and down, you don't see it in a lot in horses that live out on huge pastures where they're going up and down hills, going to and from water, to and from their hay. Where you see it is the horses that are trapped up in paddocks and trapped up in stalls, because we have changed the way horses are designed to move. Now, I also understand that where we live is where we live, and we only got so much land on this planet, and some of us have a lot of it, and some of us have a little of it. Where I live here at the boarding farm, where we leave our RV out here in Arizona, I will not leave my horse out here when we travel back to Oklahoma and Kentucky to teach. It's not because I don't trust my boarding facility, because they take great care of her. It's because there's no pasture. She has no reason to move around without me making her move. So she goes and lives with Auntie Davina in a grass paddock there in Oklahoma, where even if we aren't treading her, which most of the time Davina is treading her while I'm on the road, but or even if she's not being treaded, she's still foraging around looking for food, looking for grass, going and visiting her neighbors. And she moves around so much more there in a pasture paddock setting than she does out here in the dirt in Arizona. And I have to make that decision for my horse because it's the best decision for her. So, coming back to different ways of maintaining, I think our therapy equipment is great. I love PMF because it works so well on a systemic level. And, it penetrates the bone depending on your brand and the depth of penetration. Your therapeutic brands are going to penetrate all the way through the bone. So we are, helping strengthen those areas through basically adding better oxygen content in the body. We can use stuff like cold laser and red light to help with, bringing circulation to the area, heating that superficial layer, using them over acupuncture points, and using formulas that help benefit the back area, or just bone and spine in general. Acupuncture is amazing. Injections, shockwave, there's cold therapies. There's all kinds of equipment we can use, but that equipment is a Band-Aid if we do not correct the posture of the horse. The stretches are so important. And then also too, having correct nutrition. There is a huge correlation between OCD and the stifles eventually causing the back to start to touch. And so when we have some of these developmental issues, or maybe we have a horse with epiphysitis where their nutritional needs were not met, and it was a developmental issue that later on led into a back issue. We have to make sure the survival needs of the horse are met. Feeding off of the ground when we can. We partially ground feed, partially have hay nets, but they're low hay nets. Figuring out what can you do to meet the needs of the horse and to mimic nature in the space that you're in. Maybe it's a track system. There's a lot of great benefits there as well. But the big thing that will help is correcting our hind hoof angles and correcting our posture, and then adding the natural amount of movement that a horse should have in a day. And to get off a little bit on the farrier topic, what do we do when we have NPA or we have negative angles? We have to have a conversation with our farrier. A good farrier is going to be able to balance that horse to an x-ray. I was reading in a book, I talked a little bit about this in the first podcast. The book is What Horses Have Told Me by Dominique Jeannot, who's a French osteopath. And there was a chapter in that book where he talks about the balance of the hind feet. And when they are not in balance, again, our digestion slows down. We have all of this laundry list of problems that we've already covered. But the biggest takeaway for me on that was our horse cannot go in to rest or digest, because if our angles of the hind feet are not correct, then the pin and loop mechanism on the stifle that allows that stifle to lock and that horse to rest and that parasympathetic nervous system to take over will not engage, because that stifle cannot lock how it's supposed to if the angle of the foot is too low and or the toe is too long. And so those are things, my dog is getting restless, lay down. So those are things we have to take into consideration when we have a horse that cannot activate that parasympathetic nervous system and go into rest and digest. Now we've created the perfect scenario for that overreactive, ulcer-ridden, EPM reoccurring horse. And so by correcting those hind angles of the hoof, we can allow that stifle mechanism to work like it's supposed to, and it will allow the body to rest. So with what you see with these horses with incorrect angles is that they will shift, they will cock one behind foot and then the other, and then the other, and then the other, or they're constantly moving back and forth when they're tied up. They're just not comfortable, or they sit back and rest on a feet or lean against a wall. And so no matter what we do, if we don't start to correct some of that, then is anything else going to really progress the situation, or is our equipment just maintaining it? Like, okay, well, I'm using my equipment, I'm decreasing my pain and inflammation, but I'm not making that lifestyle change. And so that was where the idea for the wedge pad started to come from, because I didn't want to put a wedge shoe on the hind foot and let that frog recess, because if our frog is not making contact with the ground, we are diminishing the amount of circulation going through the leg. You know, we talk about that a lot with navicular horses, but the same is true on the hind foot. Or if we have a horse that has just flattened, just smashed their heels and just smashed their foot down, that will also cause disruption in the nerve, the sciatic nerve coming down the leg, and you will diminish your circulation that way as well. So, you know, in the same way, if I put my hand in a vise and I smash my fingers, is blood flow getting through? No. Or if I tie off and have a tourniquet around there, am I getting fresh blood flow? No, absolutely not. But we have to have frog contact. And so that's where, you know, there's all kinds of things. There's wedge pads, there's 3D print pads, you know, there's all kinds of different things out there now. You know, there's even glue-on type of shoes that are designed to help these problems. Find a farrier that is willing to advocate for your horse. And so, you know, that leads me into working with difficult veterinarians. And this is a hard topic to have, because I'm a huge advocate for our vets. I mean, we can't do what we're doing without our veterinarians. But I have also encountered some that have really made me scratch my head, and I'm thinking, what are you thinking? I'm going to lead this with a situation of a client of mine. So I had a client that I'd worked on this horse. I was fairly certain we were going to have some areas touching in the back. I was fairly certain we were going to have some issues in the angle of the feet, but I'm like, okay, let's go get x-rays done. You know, so I send the client and I said, this is what I want you to tell your vet. You know, we've worked on this horse and we would like to have lateral x-rays of the hind feet. We would like to have x-rays of the back. So send this horse to the vet, and she comes back and she's like, they injected stifles. I said, you've injected stifles previously and you said it didn't help. And she's like, and I said, did they x-ray? I said, you know, that's fine. Maybe there's inflammation there. If he flexed to his stifles, we'll roll with it. And I said, did they x-ray? And she said, no, they said that they don't really x-ray the hind feet on the horse. There's not really a need. Okay. Did they x-ray the back? And well, no, they thought the stifles would fix it. Oh, okay. Well, so now I'm at a standstill with what I can do, because corrective exercises had already failed this horse. Stretching had failed this horse. Body work had failed this horse. So now I'm just like, okay, I can't progress this anymore because I literally need the imaging. So she calls back, and they end up x-raying the back. So make a long story short, she waits 3 weeks for appointment, goes in, they x-ray the back, and I said, where are the laterals of the feet? We need to know how to fix these feet so that we can stretch the back out, because the horse is touching in multiple spots. Surgery was not an option for this horse, and that's okay. We respect that. We can work with what we've got. So I said, where's the hind feet? She said, Well, they didn't do it because they say it's really hard to get horses to stand on the blocks. Okay, that's what sedation's for. Sedation and a staff. That's literally okay. I said, is there another vet you could call? So we end up changing to another vet. We get our hind feet x-rays, and of course, sure enough, this horse is negative behind. So that was where we needed that diagnostic to know, to work with our farrier to see how much we could correct those hind feet without doing too much, but not doing too little. And so, that was kind of our first entry into starting to rehab this horse. And it's very hard. It is hard as a therapist because I have to recognize that at the end of the day, I am a person with a certification, multiple certifications, but at the end of the day, I am a person with a certification trying to work with a person that has a degree, a medical degree. And so this was a harsh truth that I had to learn on the human side of things, is it doesn't matter how large my skill set is, I am always going to be seen as beneath the person that has a physical therapy degree, beneath the orthopedic doctor that I'm trying to work with. I have to recognize in the eyes of most of these professionals, I am only ever going to be somebody that took a certification course. And most of the time, I can work with 90% of these professionals. On the human side, I got invited to a laser spine institute to get to view a new surgical procedure. Like, I got a lot of behind the scenes opportunities on the human side that I feel like a lot of therapists don't get. So I'm very thankful for those experiences. And in my experience, I have found with working with vets, if we stick to what we can prove, like this is what I teach my client or my graduates in my certification classes, stick to what you can prove. Here's what I see in my assessment. Here is what I am feeling in my body work. Here is what I see in corrective exercise, in the tread, in movement therapy. Therefore, I don't come on the scene trying to tell a vet how to do their job. I'm not coming in there demeaning anybody or barking orders. I'm sticking to what I can prove within my scope of practice. Now, this is where sometimes it is hard, because when I had my facility in Oklahoma, I was established enough. It was not hard for me to make a phone call and say, hey, I've got so-and-so's horse here and I'm sending her back. Can we do x-rays of blah, 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 blah. This is what I need to see. My vets that I worked with in Oklahoma and Texas, they were like, sure, let's do that thing. What I have found as a mobile practitioner, now that we have traveled to 35 states working, is you get to some of these states and the vets go, I'm not going to do that. I don't have to. I don't see a reason. Okay, well, maybe at the end of the day, maybe your reasoning just needs to be to put the money in your pocket. Shoot 2 x-rays. If you don't have a staff that can help you shoot 2 x-rays, maybe you should hire a better staff, because I had a staff in a rehab that I promise you could get it done, because we helped a lot of the vets that came in for travel appointments and looked at horses in our facility. It's very hard because we have to stay within our scope of practice. But again, my experience level, what I have determined on these vets that are not willing to do these diagnostics, they are usually not a vet that is used to working with the caliber of performance horses that I see every day in my practice. And so it is really hard to convince the little farm vet that isn't a performance-minded vet that these type of things are important. So I think the takeaway here is your performance vets that are used to looking for a needle in a haystack are usually more likely to work with you than a smaller clinic that maybe is a mixed practice clinic or has no education on biomechanics. So finding a vet that will advocate for the needs of your performance horse is important. But that being said, one thing I have run across here in Arizona is a lot of these bigger vet clinics, they don't want to x-ray the hind feet. Again, I keep running into this hurdle of, well, it's really hard to get horses to stand on the blocks. I'm like, that's what dorm is for. Like, I don't know. It's not my job to tell you how to run your clinic, but if they can't stand on the blocks, that was a horse that I certainly wouldn't put through surgery at that clinic. That's a clinic that wants to do surgery and they can't even take hind feet x-rays. I promise you, I'm taking my business somewhere else. But on the flip side of that too, one way we can help our veterinarians out as horse owners, because I have dealt with the horses that are borderline impossible to get them to stand on the blocks. If you have a horse that cannot pick up their hind feet, or that is bad for the farrier, or is kicking, or can only hold a foot up for 3 seconds, you've got to figure out why. Because it is not your vet's responsibility to train your untrained horse. Now, sometimes these horses cannot help it. When that femoral nerve bundle has a ton of compression on it, when that sciatic nerve has a ton of compression, I'm telling you through experience, it is borderline impossible to get a horse to pick up their hind feet. But you just got to do it. Like, you just have to. You have to find a way around it, and usually that way is going to be fixing the angles of the hind feet. I refuse to send a horse home that isn't safe with their feet, because most of the time there's a reason why. Now, again, the horse is coming through my rehab. It's not like I'm rehabbing a horse that has not been handled a lot in most cases. Most of the time when you're sending one to a rehab, that rehab is going to turn away a horse that cannot be handled safely, because we don't want to have a wreck on our equipment, and I don't want my staff hurt. I don't want your horse hurt, and I'm not taking one that can't handle reasonably well. Fear is one thing, untrained is another. But in my experience, when I've had these horses that won't pick up their hind feet and I correct the angles, they will start to pick up their hind feet again. So I had a horse that came out of a surgical center. They did not x-ray the hind feet. They sent this horse to me with shoes that had been on for 14 weeks post-surgery, because they were too scared to lay this horse down and try to get the shoes off. And it was basically like, here's this problem, good luck with it. We were able to, by correcting the angles of that horse's feet, now it was an undertaking where we had to sedate. The guys were helping hold this horse up. We kind of almost leaned her over against a solid wall to get the shoes off of her. Getting the shoes off and wedge pads on was a bit of an undertaking that I would have not wanted anyone to witness. But what was the crazy turnaround on this horse is, a week after having those wedge pads on, you could walk back there and pick her foot up. And that is what made me a believer. And we saw it happen time after time after time again. And so when we're doing surgery on the backs of these horses, I will not send a horse to surgery if I have a choice. I will not send a horse to surgery without having wedge pads and the angles balanced behind on the hind feet first. Because what I have found in my experience is, when you go in there and you create that space, I recognize we're creating this much more space, which doesn't seem like a lot, but over 4 or 5 or 6 spots, that it radiates on down that dorsal line of fascia, and then our ankle drops more and our heel drops more, and that stretches and compresses the sciatic nerve more. And now we went from a horse that was difficult for the farrier to impossible for the farrier. And I would rather correct that before surgery, if at all possible, because I want to set that horse up for success. And so, jumping into the different types of surgeries, you have two main types. You have the ligament snip, and you have the bone shave surgery. Usually your ligament snip is done standing. Usually your bone shave is done lying down. You have some surgeons that do a mixture of the two. a surgeon that we worked with on multiple cases there in Oklahoma. He does the ligament snip where they go in and just blade and snap, if you will, the little ligaments that are in between the joint spaces, the little interspinal ligaments. And it's an interesting, when you hear it, you don't really consider how strong your spinal ligaments are until you kind of hear that snap. And so they actually cut those to allow for more spacing in the back. And that's the less invasive of the two surgeries, because when you look at the scars and the insertions, they come on the side, go underneath your big ligament. And so they're underneath it and creating space there. And most of the time, like if they have one that they cannot create enough space and they need to go in there and shave a little bit of the bone, they will do that as well. The bone shave is typically done laying down, and they basically go in there and section out the part of the bone that is touching and remove it. A lot longer turnaround, a lot more scarring, a lot harder on the connective tissue with the bone shave. You know, I have seen success with both. I've had horses return to performance with both. It all comes down to that rehab. And most failed surgeries are not a botched surgery, meaning our surgeon did something incorrectly. They are a failed rehab. Now, another way that, or another thing I'm going to get a little bit on a soapbox about is I have a completely different thought process on rehabbing these horses post-surgery than most of the vets out there. Again, a lot of my research comes from the human side of things. And I can tell you from somebody who I have been on the operating table 20 times in my lifetime myself. They will not let you out of the hospital if you cannot do at least minimal, simple physical therapy exercises. You know, if you have to stay overnight in a hospital, they're in there badgering you, wanting you to get up and walk, wanting you to do some minor exercises, because that sets you up for success. Never have I encountered on the human side for them to say, okay, well, we did this back surgery, so I want you to go lay on the couch for 90 days and do nothing, and then you can start walking, and then like 120 days, just go back to work and act like the surgery never happened. You are not going to have that in the human side. So why on our equine athletes do we say, okay, you know, send them home from surgery and stall rest them for 60 days and then kick them out for 30 days and then go back to riding them? Where does that make sense? You know, it's been proven on x-ray that or ultrasound that muscle atrophy is detectable within 3 or 4 days of being on stall rest. So if we are having atrophy happen from not doing anything, you know, we are losing stabilizing muscle much quicker than what we created it, right? You know, we'd love for exercise to be a lot faster process than what it is. You know, if we are losing stabilizing muscle every single day that our horse is not in work, how much harder is it going to be for that horse to come back? Because now we've lost all of our core strength. We've lost all of our glute strength. We've lost everything that was our foundation that we had. So if we have a horse that goes into surgery with lack of stabilizing muscle, and then we just do nothing with them for 90 days, we almost have a horse that is newborn weak, you know, if you will. That's a slight exaggeration, but think about it. You can't just go back to riding that horse. You've got to strengthen that core. You've got to do the corrective exercises. You know, in our facility, I loved getting a horse straight after surgery. Drop them off to me on your way home. Let me start dealing with it, because I can start with my equipment. I can start with my laser. I can start with my PMF. I can start with all of these pieces of my facility and then work my way up to the equipment. Or like using the aqua tread, or using an underwater treadmill, or using a walker. I have to start with the healing process first. And in most cases in our facility, by the time the staples were ready to come out of that horse, we were ready to start them at least on the dry tread, and if not, with a little bit of water, depending on their fitness level before the surgery. And what's crazy is, like, I have had clients that have showed up at my door livid at surgery facilities that go in there and they do this crazy invasive surgery and then tell them to ride them in 30 days. And it's like, in what world? It takes so long for nerves to heal. That's one of the slowest healing mechanisms in our body. And, so we can enhance that some. We're not making the body do anything with our equipment. We are basically allowing the body the opportunity to enhance its own healing abilities. We don't have to tell the body how to heal. It knows how to do that. But if we can enhance the quality and shorten the time, that is for the better of the horse. And so, let's say we've had that surgery done. We have to figure out, are we going to send that horse to a facility, or can we rehab this alone? And I have therapists that have graduated my program that don't even have the underwater treadmill, that do plenty of kissing spine rehabs with and without surgery. So, proing and conning, do we send the horse to surgery, or do we send the horse to a rehab, or do we rehab this at home? The first question that I'm going to ask you is, do you have the dedication, the time to be consistent with this rehab? The person that only goes to PT one day a week and they don't do their exercises at home, they will never have the healing that they want. They will not have the quality of healing of the person that goes 2 to 3 days a week to PT and then is dedicated enough to do their exercises on their own. I used to tell my human clients, if the only time you do your stretches and exercises is when your PT is staring at you, you are never going to get well. And all you're doing is padding my pocketbook with these sessions. And I have the same thought with the horses. If you are not doing something with that horse 5 to 6 days a week, when we are in that rehab process, they're going to fall behind, and you're not going to be able to build that horse back up in the way that you want. Everybody wants to buy a saddle that says it has spine relief. They want to buy a pad. They want to buy a supplement. In a lot of cases, they buy equipment and that doesn't even get used to the frequency that it should. Everybody has good intentions of spending money on the things, but they are not willing to have the dedication to put in the time and effort that it actually takes to rehab a horse back from something this serious. And maybe it's that we don't think about it being as serious as it is because it's becoming so routine. Back surgeries and knee surgeries in people, they're a super routine thing, but it's also really, really serious because, if something goes haywire, your spinal cord is right there that could possibly be affected. And so, it's not my intention to go, every horse that has surgery has to go to a rehab. Because here I am, I could have sent my horse, I could have had surgery done on my mare in Oklahoma, and sent her right to Davina's and let her be working there at Davina's facility, since I don't have a facility of my own. But my first stifle surgery horse, I rehabbed on my own. I have no doubt that I can rehab this one on my own as well. We're about almost 6 weeks in at this point. And so now, as we transition back to Oklahoma and Kentucky to teach, she's going to accompany me along. And, you bet your dollar that I'm totally putting her on the tread and making the rehab process easier and more efficient for her. But I wanted to show that you don't have to do that to create results. But what you have to have is consistency and dedication. And sometimes it's hard when you get a veterinary protocol that says stall this horse for 60 days and throw it out in the pasture. It's hard to know whether or not that's sound advice. But when I compare things again back to the human industry, your orthopedic surgeon is not who gives you your take-home protocol. You get sent to PT. Your orthopedic surgeon may not even know what exercises you need to be doing if they were not an athlete previously themselves. Because I've worked with both kinds of, I've worked with the academic surgeons, and then I've also worked with surgeons that were past athletes. My preference is surgeons that were past athletes because I feel like they're more relatable, but both people do a great job. But in the human side, we send people, there's a chain of events. You find your way to that orthopedic surgeon, either by way of a bodyworker refers you or your chiropractor refers you because it's like, all right, we're just not getting better here. You have to go see an orthopedic doctor. Or you've already tried physical therapy and that's failed. Similar to, we talk about starting out with corrective exercises. And if our horse doesn't get any better or our horse gets more sore where they're exercise intolerant, now we have to go that next step. And then you have the surgical procedure, and maybe injections have failed. We do injections on the human side too. We usually try those on the horse side. All right, our injections have failed. We are left with needing surgery. Or maybe we have a horse that is in so much pain, or a person that is in so much pain that they simply cannot do any sort of physical therapy or corrective exercise because it hurts too bad. I was that way with my hips. I went in and told my surgeon, I said, I'm going to tell you one thing, like, I have enough of a skill set that if my insurance wants me to go do 6 weeks of physical therapy, I'm telling you, I'm not doing it because I hurt so bad that I am not willing to show up and do the work at PT. So you can tell my insurance that I'm not doing it, that it's already failed. And that's again, learning how to advocate for your needs and the needs of your horse. So if exercise is not yielding the results that we need, we have to go to the surgical option. And, how life-changing would the equine industry be if it was standard protocol after a surgical procedure to go work with an experienced rehab therapist, or to go work with an experienced rehab facility, or if our horse insurance would pay for 30 days of rehab at a facility. If we can change the perspective and the outlook of the industry of what is considered the normal, then we would have a lot more successful procedures and a lot happier people, because at least you've been given the information of how important it is to make a lifestyle change for that horse. We don't want the obese horse that has had surgery. We definitely don't want the underweight horse that's had surgery either. And we do not want the horse that is stuck endless hours in a paddock or a stall following this surgery, because we're just setting ourselves up for failure. Another thing to think about with facilities is facilities are not all the same. I don't expect a vet to know how to rehab. And although there are some great veterinary owned facilities out there, my experience has been that most of the time the rehab side of those facilities is run by techs and just hired people that are working there that do not have the education or the certification backing to really completely assess your horse how it needs to be assessed. Because I'm fixing to do another podcast on underwater treadmills and how to pick the right rehab facility for you. So stay tuned for that one, because we're gonna go more in depth on that topic soon. But not all facilities specialize in rehab. Some simply specialize in fitness, which is great and it's fine. But if you cannot assess the posture of the horse and monitor the slightest change in muscle, you can create more soreness than you can correct issues within the horse. So, things to ask: is that facility qualified? Like, what are the qualifications of the people that are handling your horse day to day? Not, is it veterinary owned? Because I only care about that if the veterinarian is the one doing the treading, and chances are they are not going to be. So, have conversations and dialogue, have them create a protocol for you. I would expect a facility to give a client a take-home protocol. If you don't get a take-home protocol from your facility, I would question that, because even if we do 90 days of rehab of your horse and they're kind of ready to go, you've got to do some fundamental things to continue that progress that we've started. It's like our corrective exercises. Those become a way of life for a horse that has had an invasive procedure like a spine surgery, or a horse that has had degeneration or kissing of the spine that we're trying to correct through fitness. I look at them like this way, that it's, your NBA players don't do dribbling and shooting drills because they have forgotten how to dribble a basketball. They're in the NBA. They are doing these fundamental drills to keep the proprioceptive nerves in their body sharp and attuned, but also to notice minor changes. If we're doing a shooting drill and we're starting to slightly turn our wrist, that personal trainer or physical therapist that works with that NBA player is going to immediately go, we have to figure out where the issue is in the muscle that is causing, where is the weakness that is causing the compensation pattern of you turning your wrist. And if you do not have individuals that are qualified enough to find those issues and translate them in a way that an owner can understand, then you may not get the results that you are seeking. And other things to add on transitioning those horses back to performance. We want to go and ride that horse. We want to, even if that horse has been at our facility, I don't want somebody to just jump ride and go enter something. I want you to go out and ride your horse. A horse that has had active kissing spine, or that is a post-surgery kissing spine horse, will take more warm up and more cool down and be more susceptible to weather changes than the average horse will. So this is where, our different pieces of therapy equipment and things can come in, as far as, being able to help. But I'm telling you, movement is the cheapest way to create a better performing, longer lasting athlete. And I'll also come back to, we talked about tie downs and head setters at the very end of the last podcast. If I have a horse that has had kissing spine issues, or that has had kissing spine surgery, that would not be a horse that I want to trap that head down in a head setter, a tie down, be using a bunch of draw reins, side reins, that type of thing. Because going back to fundamentally, when you trap and restrict the movement of the neck and the body's ability to balance with the neck, you will get your spine in a bind again, and you'll start to have back pain again in that horse. If we don't keep the angles of the hind feet correct, not saying these horses have to live in wedge pads forever, because a lot of them transition out of them in 3 to 4 shoe cycles. Some have to stay in them. It just depends on the horse. Some people can change the arch in their foot, or wear orthotics, and then transition out of that back into regular shoes with improved posture. Some people have to stay in orthotics their entire life. It just depends on the individual. But if we have a horse we've made these drastic changes to, trapping their head down is a fast way to head right back to the same back pain situation that we started with almost 4 hours ago when we started this podcast. So, and then the follow-up care. Maybe you do have to do some injections here or there. Maybe we do have to maintenance as we're continuing to progress back into competition. But if I have a horse that has had instance of kissing spine, or has had kissing spine surgery, I would always do yearly x-rays of the back and feet. That's a non-negotiable with me. Any of you that have worked with me as a horse owner, I'm going to ask for x-rays. Have you had x-rays done? Let's go get x-rays if you have not had x-rays done. And what's fun to see is a horse that's touching in a spot or two, and you get the feet right on this horse, you start to get that horse strengthened back up. A lot of times you will see that spine start to create more space there, back to that natural spacing. So back to our suspension bridge. If one side of our suspension bridge is collapsing, then it weakens both sides. But if we start to strengthen our bridge back up, it can withstand a lot of weight and a lot of force. So, everybody wants to get on a soapbox about things. I am somebody who rides treeless saddles, and I'm not shy about it. I have ridden them for years and years. Are they right for every horse? No. Do they cause back pain in horses? In my experience, no, they are not a huge contributor. Now, the big contributor to the back pain of somebody riding a treeless saddle is a lot of times you will see people that buy a treeless saddle because they feel like it's going to hold them in and protect them more. You have to have above average core strength to utilize a treeless saddle in the way that it is designed. Now, if you are somebody that's a trail rider that is just walking, you can get by without that. But I'm talking in performance at a high rate of speed. I'm talking your endurance riders. I'm talking your barrel horse people. If you do not have more than the average rider's core strength, that saddle will tip you forward, and that forward and back rocking can absolutely make your horse sore. But the same could be said for a treed saddle. I see people all the time. Like I said, they want to buy these super deep saddles, and it rocks them back behind the balance of their horse. And so they are just like a jackhammer bouncing up and down on the back part of that horse's spine. And that causes issues. Talking about the weight of a rider, these are kind of some ugly truths here. I have seen riders that are on the heavier side that have an extremely light seat because they can use their legs. I have seen riders that are on the thinner side that do not have enough core strength and muscle, and they just bounce all over and look like Whiplash the monkey strapped to their horse. It is less dependent upon the poundage and more dependent on how you are able to use your stabilizing muscles to help your horse. And so those are things to keep in mind. I keep things very simple. I am a person that doesn't fall for marketing tactics very often. It's like looking through the marketing, like everybody loves the tag words of kissing spine. Do I think that there are bloodlines that contribute to it more than others? Absolutely. If you breed a long-backed horse to a long-backed horse, and both of them are upright in the front and low-heeled behind, chances are you're going to increase your probability for back issues. We have proven that time and time again with the breeding of weenie dogs, and how much back issues impact the lives of those little dogs. And so, is there a genetic factor there? They're working on proving that. Would I let a genetic factor control my horse's life or my thoughts about that horse's performance? I would not. This is my personal opinion. I would not. I would work on strengthening the individual that is in front of me. I would look at the individual, or I would hire someone, someone like me that has an understanding of biomechanics that can go through and do a full whole horse assessment. And then I would start strengthening the weak areas of that horse. And there is no perfect horse out there. They're all going to have some weakness. I mean, my goodness, any fitness program you talk about, it's a reoccurring thing. Core and glutes, core and glutes, core and glutes, like literally every human fitness program. That's the hardest thing to build in the body and the quickest thing to lose. Core and glutes, core and glutes. But we got to have them. We got to have them to have the movement that we're supposed to have and to keep our spine healthy. And so, I feel like that's kind of a point to end on here of we've covered a lot of information in this podcast. Um, and I hope that I have broken it down simply. I tried really hard in these situations not to lead into brand specifics of, oh, you got to have this brand or this brand or this brand. I've tried to just lead with logical information and, and the behavioral component of it. And maybe we'll follow up with a third podcast. Maybe I'll sit down with Jordan and we'll do a Swapping Stories podcast where we talk about some of our favorite kissing spine horses and the problems that they encountered and the rehab process on some of those. I know I sprinkled a few stories in here, but I think that'd be a great podcast for Jordan and I to get in on as well. So, stay tuned and we'll do some more information on this. Like I said, if you missed the first podcast, go back and listen to it because that's where we covered a lot of our signs and symptoms. And, if you have questions, reach out to us and I'm always glad to help. Happy trails, y'all.